Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this episode, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis discuss the latest amendments to the New Zealand Health and Safety Act and how they're leading the way. We hope you enjoy the chat. If you do, please support our work by giving us a rating and subscribing on your favourite podcast platform. And if you'd like more information on R2A, our newsletter and resources, or have any feedback or topic ideas, head to the website r2a.com.au.
Hi Richard, welcome to a podcast session.
Good morning, Gaye. Good to be back.
It is good to be back. It's good to be back. It's been a crazy couple of weeks.
I keep reading that now as you get older, you're meant to get happier.
Okay.
I'm supposed to be ecstatic at my stage of life.
I was going to make that joke, but I thought I'd better not. Okay, today's topic we're going to talk about the Health and Safety at Work Amendment Bill out of New Zealand, and some interesting developments that's recommending and looking like implementing, but they're really leading the way in this health and safety space at the moment. So I think, as you always do, can you give us a brief summary of what the amendment bill looks like, and then we'll discuss maybe some of the implications of it.
I'd better just explain the reason why we came across this is because we're doing some work in New Zealand and we're briefing relevant legal counsel, and so we're just sort of checking what the status of various things were because we're fairly familiar with it all, having done quite a lot of work in different places in Kiwi land. But we sort of came across this, and we found this particularly interesting because we had noticed the Kiwis had been particularly active in prosecuting people and successfully prosecuting them. In particular, you might recall the volcanic eruption with I think 23 people got killed. In the end, 7 companies got convicted.
Correct. The individuals walked away, but the companies were convicted.
But the one that sort of motivated everybody was in 2024, the former CEO of the Port of Auckland got convicted for a heavy lift crane dropped something on somebody and killed someone, and the former CEO got convicted. And that was despite the fact that CEO, from all the readings I'd done, was actually pretty strong on safety and had tried to get a lot of things done. Now, we're not entirely sure. I'm sort of so we're listening to the Kiwi Parliament to work out why they've decided to introduce this amendment. But what we thought we'd do is go through what we understood to be the key bits of it. It's obviously available online, although it does note that, and we printed this off about a week or so ago, and it does say will be replaced in March. So I guess this thing's ongoing fairly fast. But basically, it does a number of things. The overall objective, as they sort of point out, is to make the thing more efficient, because I think what they've noticed is there's been a lot of wheels spinning, an awful lot of people spending an awful lot of time on lesser matters that they shouldn't be doing. And so when you're sort of looking at the summary of this thing, there's a clarification of regulators as the first point. There's their CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, whom we've had a bit of dealing with.
Yes, we have.
And their maritime regulator, whom we've had a little bit of dealing with. Their roles are more precisely defined, and much crisper. But then the next and most important thing is they say is focus on critical risk, which is something we've hammered
for a very long time.
Very long time. And they define critical risk. I mean, there's a whole lot of definitions at the back about amusement rides and things like that, and crane movements in particular, which presumably
will be an output from the Auckland incident.
And I did notice that WorkSafe Australia has got a call for action on
crane movements
at ports.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a popular subject.
Yeah.
But then the other definition of critical risk is basically, I mean, they've got better words to cover it, but it's kill or maim. Yeah. If it can lead to a death, then you're meant to have it under control. That sort of led on to a little supplementary point, is that they also then say that they define a small PCBU. And a small PCBU is 20 people or less. Right. And small PCBUs only have to focus on the critical ones. Okay.
So any issues that can kill and maim, the small PCBU has to just do that. For larger organisations, they have to prioritise the critical ones, but still have governance processes in place to manage the other.
Yes, but it's not an offence to failure to prioritise, because presumably you're going to still do them all.
Yes.
Although our frustration is that people get lost in the detail and after a while just ignore the big rare one, which is the one they really want you to focus on.
And I think the question still comes up, especially in the consulting work that we do. It's really that question of credibility. You know, when something is so rare, we often get the pushback of, do we really have to worry about this because it's so rare that it's not going to happen? So that likelihood argument still creeps in even when they're determining critical.
Oh, well, this amendment is quite clear that, you know,
If it can kill a mate.
It can a mate and it's possible, then you've got to do something about it.
Okay.
As far as I can tell. It does say that they clarify overlaps with other legislation, which wasn't totally clear to me. What they're saying is that the Work Health and Safety Act is not meant to be a backstop to public health.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean, I mean, for example, one of the examples they sort of give is if in order to get to a recreational area, somebody has to walk over private land like farmland or something like that, the mere fact of walking over the farmland doesn't create a liability for the farmer.
Right.
But obviously the farmer runs the poor character over with a tractor.
Yes.
That's the consequence of work. So you still have to consider those sorts of things. So they're being very clear about what you're trying to do there. The other thing they do is they clarify the duty of a director. In our Work Health and Safety legislation, it says demonstrated due diligence includes these 6 points. Remember between the penultimate and the final one, they changed one word?
Yes.
Although all the lawyers keep telling us if it's not in the Act, then including something else would be hard to do. But we're not lawyers, so you can check that one. But when they define it, they actually then define it, and I'll sort of go
This is in the amendment bill?
This is in the amendment bill.
Yes.
They basically say that, well, there's two parts. The first part was that, I'm not quite sure why they felt necessary to do this, but if you had a duty as a worker and an officer, your duty of an officer took precedence.
That seems logical.
One would have thought so, but I guess if it's not clearly stated.
Yeah, can be argued.
And then in the section on due diligence, they now say due diligence means taking reasonable steps to understand the nature and operations of the PCBU, the hazards and risk associated with operations, and work health and safety matters as it generally applies to that business. And then in terms of controlling these things, to ensure that the PCBU has available to use and uses appropriate resources and processes, has appropriate process for receiving and considering information, has and implements process for complying with any duty, and Part C is your favourite observation, to verify the provision of these resources and processes.
I think that's a really interesting one because we often get asked the question about, doing these things and what controls go in place, but then what's the quality assurance around it to make sure what you say you're going to do, A, is actually done, but also is maintained to a level that ensures that effectiveness of that control. And I think when we talk to boards and things like that, they sort of, it's done and dusted and you move on to the next thing, because they've got a long list of things to do, but they've got to keep asking the question, are all of these things remaining in place? And that comes down to that governance process that you've got, and all of these things are interlinked. And I don't know, they're still being done in silos, I feel, in organisations.
I think you're right. And it always fascinates us, you see a lot of risk registers, and a fail control is an item risk register being rather the quality thing. Although I do think, this is the case, and I suspect that's why it's in the Act. If you've got a control and somebody's dead because the control failed, all hell breaks loose.
It has to.
And that's why I think they're specifically listed in the legislation. What they tend to do is put in things, something bad happens, and then what they tend to do is put in what they felt ought to have been in place to make sure that thing ought not to have happened.
Yeah, right.
But that's why it's a sort of moral philosophy thing, and it's a bit strange because you're trying to make a moral imperative. I think when you talk to anybody about it, it's self-evident. A failed control's got to, somebody's got to suffer.
But I think there's two interesting parts to that, because when we go and talk to boards, sometimes it's sort of like, are they getting the right information about the critical issues? And then I think the second step is what are the critical controls in place to manage those issues, and what's your quality assurance process and procedure around that to ensure that they're being sustained. So even though the board might not have a detailed understanding of those, they have to have the tools and be able to ask the questions to make sure that happens. So it's that verification step of both the critical issues, the controls, and what makes us confident that they're being sustained and implemented properly.
Yep. The last thing which of significance, I think, from the point of view of anybody who's interested in these things, is really a strengthening approved codes of practice. And they're basically saying that certain approved codes of practice, if you have implemented that code of practice, you have demonstrated due diligence. And I think the argument...
So that's for critical risks as well?
Yeah. Well, I think the argument was, I mean, they've got a couple of examples here, but they, they're looking at obviously creating more of these approved ones to try and... It's particularly for the smaller PCBUs. I can see how it's very, very hard for a small PCBU to come to grip.
From scratch, absolutely. But we've talked about, the roles of standards and codes of practice and things like that. They're still lagging indicators, and in a world where technology is changing so fast, I think that could also be a little bit
that one to me is
tricky.
I think it's going to be a few test cases before they resolve that one, because if an approved code of practice has an obvious control or misses an obvious control that ought to have been in place, I, for the life of me, can't see, because the legislation still takes priorities. But again, if the legislation says...
You rely on that code. I better guess this is our go-back line, isn't it? You'd have to check that one with your lawyers.
Every time.
But we would probably just caution that as a black and white rule, because... codes of practice and standards are lagging indicators, and often don't have the latest up-to-date thinking of what potential controls could be.
No, that's correct. And the technology, the way the technology is changing out there, I mean, we're getting...
So fast.
We're getting completely frustrated with Apple and Microsoft and everybody else. This business of becoming an appendage to an AI in some form, rather than having our own computing platform, is just driving us crackers. Yes. But that's a common problem for everyone.
So the New Zealanders really appear to be leading the way in this particular area.
And it is. We were reflecting on why might that be the case. And you see, the Kiwis are a little different, because they've got their Accident Compensation Commission, which is no fault. And that means something bad happens, then they try to patch the place up without blaming somebody particularly for it. Whereas we in Australia have always been pretty keen on common law actions, right? Now, our WHS legislation is basically a statutory statement of the common law duty of care. And obviously I assume that if you're politicians and things like that, or parliamentarians, you've seen a lot of people get hurt. And the common law didn't seem to be sufficient. You then elevate that to statute law to try and make those provisions or that philosophical and ethical understanding
more robust.
Robust. Now, the Kiwis attended all our Workplace Relation Ministers' Council and kept an eye on what we Australians are up to. Yes. Left it for a couple of years, but then implemented their legislation in 2015. And I've got a funny suspicion, but having implemented it, some bad things happened, and they immediately started prosecuting and...
Successfully prosecuting
and convicting people. And they looked at that and said, we weren't expecting that robust a result. I mean, I think that's saying that if a prosecutor, if an act exists and a prosecutor says, well, as far as I can tell, if I prosecute and I have a successful prosecution, I believe that's the duty of the prosecutor, the public prosecutor in those circumstances. So if as a parliament you're not happy with that, then you've got to sort of tweak the act to make it more precise, so that you only prosecute the ones you want to prosecute, you don't prosecute people which in a way that isn't helpful to society as a whole. Because they're trying to stop
the ones that they have been successful on is, the White Island. I mean, they have been kill and maim incidents.
Oh, that's certainly the case. But they're trying to work out, they sort of backed off from prosecuting individuals, but they still prosecuted the businesses.
Organisations. I think it's also, there's probably been industry complaints or frustrations, I guess, that so much effort is put into the WHS space, work health and safety space, and you often don't see the results of it. You're putting all of this effort in, and
it's not being efficient.
It's not being efficient, and you're right. You're getting lost in the detail and spinning the wheels for things that don't necessarily, give you the biggest bang for the buck.
Bureaucratic administrative structures that are causing mayhem for the people to actually get on and do things.
So this sort of one gives that the tool. Well, it gives two things, I think. It gives people a tool to get on with the job, but it also gives those critical issues that are often discounted and by the likelihood so much that no one ever gets on with it.
Correct.
They don't even get to the stage of looking at what controls could be put in place. It gets put in the too hard basket. Yep. And I think the little bit that we've read on the Auckland CEO was, yes, he was doing things around health and safety and hadn't quite got to this particular issue.
Well, I don't.
Although he knew about it.
He knew about it, but I don't think he'd got on with it fast enough.
So often, and that's what I was sort of trying to say, some of these lesser things are taking so much time and spinning the wheels so much that you don't get onto those things that need to be prioritised and focused on, even though their potential, well, they could be rare.
Yeah, that's right. But I think the other thing that's sort of puzzling me a little bit, I mean, they're trying to clarify regulators and things like that. But in the end, the point is that stop bad things happening. And in the end, the duty is to demonstrate SOFAP. That hasn't changed.
Yes.
And the question of who's going to prosecute whom after the event and in what court and what jurisdictions, at one level doesn't matter. It's all about control. It's not about ownership. And I think
And
that's
controlling before the fact.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's some other confusions going on still around the place, which regrettably I suspect it will take a court case to determine.
Yeah. So interesting space at the moment in New Zealand. It'll be interesting to see if Australia goes down that path as well.
Well, it'll have to be the four big, the way it seems to work, the four big jurisdictions have to get together and then the lesser jurisdictions will follow along. But that's a complicated process.
It is, and not one to solve today.
No.
So thanks for joining us today, Richard, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Gaye.